He was about 6 feet tall. He was scourged until his body was unrecognizable. He carried the cross through dust and stone until his legs collapsed beneath him. And on a lonely hill 2,000 years ago, he was crucified not for myth, not for symbol, but for truth, because no one dies for a lie. The Passion of the Christ was never meant to be just another film. It was the first time anyone attempted to recreate Golgotha with such ruthless authenticity. Every lash, every gasp, every shudder of agony rendered exactly as it was described. A story of sacrifice so profound, it reshaped the world. But what unfolded behind the cameras was unlike anything the cast or crew had ever witnessed. Something began to stir on that set, something unseen, something ancient, something that blurred the line between performance and reality. What should have been a controlled production became a landscape of inexplicable events, impossible coincidences, and moments that left even hardened professionals speechless. At first, they dismissed it as pressure, exhaustion, imagination, but soon they could no longer ignore what was happening around them. Storms appeared out of clear skies. Winds rose without warning, cold, sharp, and deliberate, swirling through the props as if responding to the scenes being filmed. Actors felt watched. Technicians reported sudden silence that pressed on their eardrums. And more than once, people swore they sensed a presence moving quietly between them, something that vanished the moment anyone turned their head. A single bolt tore downward with surgical precision, striking the actor portraying Jesus. Then, unbelievably, a second bolt struck the assistant director in the exact same spot. Not a cloudburst, not a storm. Just 2 bolts from an empty sky, 2 impossible strikes that left both men alive and untouched by burns. And after that day, everything changed. Suffering became real, emotion deepened. Scenes that were meant to be acted revealed themselves as lived experience. People who had come to the set indifferent to faith found themselves trembling during filming, some weeping uncontrollably, others falling to their knees without knowing why. Something unseen had entered the work, something far greater than cinema. Some crew members said, "This isn't a movie anymore." Others whispered, "We are not alone out here." But the strangest moment of all, the moment that convinced Mel Gibson he had stepped into territory no film had ever crossed, came later, buried in the editing room, when they discovered the film reel that could not be erased. 2 reels ruined by mysterious overexposure, yet a third reel, poorly placed and pointed in the wrong direction, preserved perfectly. Experts shook their heads. Archivists refused to speculate. One technician muttered, "It's as if something protected only the one that mattered." For 20 years, the world has heard rumors, stories, pieces of truth, but Mel Gibson has never told everything until now. And as you will see, the truth behind the Passion of the Christ is far stranger, darker, and more supernatural than anyone has ever imagined. Are you ready? Because once you step onto that set, nothing you believe about this film or the world will remain the same. By the end of the 1,990 seconds, Mel Gibson appeared to be at the peak of everything a man in Hollywood could desire. He had fame that crossed continents, the legacy of Braveheart behind him, influence in every studio office, and the kind of public admiration most actors only dream about. People saw him as unstoppable, untouchable, someone for whom success came as naturally as breathing. But the public image was an illusion. Behind the lights and applause, Gibson was slipping into one of the darkest periods of his life. His marriage was deteriorating, his relationships strained, and his inner world collapsing under the weight of decisions he could no longer justify. Alcohol became more than a habit, it became an escape, a way to quiet the noise, to numb the guilt, to silence the growing emptiness he carried everywhere he went. He later admitted in interviews something that shocked the world. "I didn't want to live anymore." Those weren't dramatic words. They were confessions from a man who felt the ground giving way beneath him. The loneliness was suffocating, the guilt relentless, and the fame that once felt like a crown now felt more like shackles tightening around his throat. He tried to outrun it through work, through distractions, through silence, but the despair only grew. One night, long after the city had fallen asleep, Gibson found himself driving aimlessly through the California darkness. The road was empty, the sky colorless, the horizon disappearing into a blur. Something inside him finally cracked. Fear, exhaustion, shame, everything he had kept buried surged at once. His hands shook, his breathing faltered. He pulled the car over, unable to continue. He fell to his knees on the asphalt, broken in a way he had never been before. And then something happened, something he had not expected. A presence not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakably real, seemed to settle into the silence around him. A voice he couldn't hear with his ears but felt inside his chest. A weight, a question, a calling. He opened the door, reached into the back seat, and pulled out a Bible he had not touched in years. He opened it almost at random, but his eyes fell on the chapters describing Christ's passion, the agony in Gethsemane, the scourging, the mocking, the cross. He read the words slowly at first, then hungrily, page after page, as if the text was speaking directly into the hollow places of his soul. Something stirred that night. Something ancient, something he thought he had lost forever. In the days that followed, the reading became a ritual. He woke thinking about the passion. He went to sleep with the crucifixion still on his mind. The more he read, the more he felt confronted not by judgment, but by truth. A truth he had avoided for decades. More than once he found himself weeping alone, overwhelmed by the weight of Christ's suffering and the uncomfortable realization of his own. He later summarized the turning point in a single sentence. "My sins were the first to nail him to the cross." Those words were not poetry. They were a revelation. They were the moment the idea for the Passion of the Christ was born. It didn't come to him as a script. It didn't arrive as a business plan or a cinematic ambition. It came as a vow, raw, painful, urgent. It was the only path that felt like redemption, the only direction that made sense in the ruins of his life. He would tell the story exactly as it happened, without embellishment, without softening, without compromise. He knew Hollywood would resist. He knew critics would attack. He knew the industry would turn its back on him. And none of that mattered. Because in that moment of absolute collapse, kneeling in the dark, holding a Bible with trembling hands, Mel Gibson felt something he had not felt in years. Purpose. A purpose powerful enough to drag him out of the darkness and into a journey that would test every part of his soul. Once the idea took root, there was no turning back. But Mel Gibson quickly discovered that wanting to tell the Passion and actually bringing it to life were two very different battles. The more he explored the possibility, the more resistance he encountered, subtle at first, then unrelenting. He spent months studying every detail of Christ's final hours, the historical accounts, the geography of Jerusalem, the stations of the cross, ancient languages, early Christian writings. But the deeper he went, the clearer one conviction became. The story had to be told exactly as it happened. No softening, no modernizations, no comforting gloss. The moment he shared this vision with the industry, the struggle began. Executives listened politely until he mentioned the languages: Aramaic, Hebrew, Latin, no English. Gibson shook his head. Not a single word. Silence. To him, the languages weren't an artistic choice, they were a matter of truth. To the studios, they were suicide. No major film in modern history had attempted to reach global audiences using tongues long dead. No producer was willing to stake their reputation, let alone millions of dollars, on something so unconventional. And the language issue was only the beginning. He refused to cast Hollywood stars. He refused to soften the violence. He refused to include inspirational monologues that audiences could digest like entertainment. What he proposed, they said, was unmarketable. One studio head leaned back in his chair and asked bluntly, "Who do you think is going to watch this? This isn't a movie, it's a dare." These so very. When he pitched the project to another major distributor, the response was even harsher. Tone it down, make it symbolic, give the audience hope at the end. But hope wasn't what Gibson was trying to sell. He wasn't trying to sell anything. He wanted to show the weight of sacrifice exactly as Scripture described it. If he compromised, he believed he would betray the very story he had been entrusted with. Eventually, The rejections piled into a chorus. Every studio, every investor, every conventional path to bringing the passion to the screen. No, some disguised their rejection in polite language. Others didn't bother. It will be the biggest failure of your career. It will ruin you. No one wants to see this. Those words were meant to warn him. Instead, they only sharpened his resolve. If the story of Christ had endured 2 millennia without the approval of powerful men, Gibson thought, then it did not need Hollywood's blessing now. And so he made the decision that stunned his advisors and frightened even his closest friends. He would fund the film himself. He sold assets, liquidated investments, poured nearly every dollar he had accumulated over decades into a single, unstable vision. $45 million, his personal fortune risked on something every expert predicted would collapse. But for the first time in years, he felt clarity instead of confusion. "This isn't a film I want to make," he told a colleague. "It's a film I have to make." The isolation was immediate. Phone calls went unanswered. Industry allies quietly pulled away. People questioned his sanity, but he welcomed the solitude. It reminded him that the path he was walking was not meant to be crowded. As pre-production progressed, something else became apparent, something he couldn't explain. Obstacles emerged with uncanny timing, schedules collapsing at the last minute, unexplained delays, equipment failures, unexpected losses of funding. It was as if an invisible force was pushing back against the entire project. Some called it bad luck. Gibson called it warfare. Yet with every setback, his determination only grew. The more the world resisted, the more convinced he became that the story demanded to be told in its raw, unfiltered form. The passion wasn't a spectacle, it wasn't mythology. It was the turning point of human history, and he believed its truth deserved nothing less than absolute fidelity. He pressed forward, even as the walls closed in around him. And in the midst of that pressure, one question remained. If the world refused to help him make this film, what awaited him once the cameras began to roll? What came next would shake the cast and crew in ways none of them could have imagined. As the script took shape and the vision hardened into something unshakable, one question loomed over the entire project. Who could possibly portray Jesus? It wasn't merely a casting decision. It was the fulcrum upon which the entire film would balance. A single wrong face, a single wrong presence, and the weight of the passion would collapse into theatrical imitation. Gibson knew this better than anyone, and so he waited. He sifted through names, headshots, portfolios. He received recommendations from agents, proposals from rising actors, even messages from established stars willing to audition. None of them felt right. Their faces were too familiar, their personas too defined, their fame too distracting. He needed someone the audience would not recognize, someone whose presence would not overshadow the sacredness of the story. He once said, "I wasn't looking for an actor, I was looking for a vessel." That vessel arrived quietly, without fanfare, without entourage. Jim Caviezel had built a respectable career, admired by critics but still unknown to much of the world. His eyes carried a kind of piercing calm, a depth that suggested someone who listened more than he spoke. There was gentleness in his demeanor, but also something resolute, an internal gravity. When Gibson invited him to his home, he hadn't planned a long meeting. 10 minutes, perhaps 15, just enough to gauge the man's spirit. But the conversation stretched into hours. They spoke about faith, sacrifice, doubt, fear, redemption, subjects most people in the industry avoided in casual dialogue. Yet with Caviezel, there was no discomfort, no hesitation. It was as though the two men were discussing a mission neither of them had chosen, but both had been prepared for. Still, Gibson hesitated, not because Caviezel didn't fit the role, but because the role threatened to consume whoever stepped into it. He warned him plainly, "If you take this part, everything in your life may change. Your career may end. The industry may never look at you the same way again." There was no exaggeration in his tone. It was a sober truth. Caviezel didn't flinch. He didn't ask for time to consider. He didn't ask about payment, scheduling, or conditions. Instead, he answered with a quiet conviction that caught Gibson off guard. "We all carry crosses. Maybe this is mine." In that moment, something shifted, not in the room, but in the atmosphere, like a curtain lifting. And then came the detail that sealed the decision. Caviezel casually mentioned that he had just turned 33, the traditional age of Christ at the time of the crucifixion. Gibson stared at him, struck by the coincidence. Caviezel added, almost apologetically, "My initials are J.C." Gibson later admitted that a strange chill went down his spine. Not fear, recognition. He realized he wasn't choosing Caviezel. The role had chosen him. From that day forward, Caviezel immersed himself completely. He attended Mass daily. He prayed before each scene. He meditated on the Gospels with a rigor that bordered on monastic discipline. He wasn't preparing for a performance. He was preparing for a form of suffering, physical, emotional, and spiritual. Crew members later said his demeanor changed even before filming began. His expression grew more solemn, his speech more deliberate. There were moments when he seemed distant, almost as if carrying the weight of something only he could feel. The transformation didn't alarm Gibson. It confirmed his decision, because what he needed was not a man capable of acting the passion. He needed a man capable of enduring it. Jim Caviezel was that man. But neither he nor Gibson understood the cost that awaited them on the set, a cost that would blur the line between performance and reality in ways no one could anticipate. When the first day of filming finally arrived, the crew expected nerves, challenges, even chaos. What they did not expect was the atmosphere, the strange, heavy stillness that settled over Matera like a veil. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably present. A sensation that something in the environment had shifted, as though the town itself recognized the story being retold. The cast and crew climbed the rocky hills before dawn, carrying cables, cameras, makeup kits, and props. But as the sun rose over the limestone cliffs, many of them paused. The light felt different, cooler, sharper, almost metallic. The wind, usually restless in the early morning, refused to move. Even the birds remained silent, perched motionless on the rooftops, as if waiting for something unseen to occur. Veteran technicians later described the sensation in the same words. "It felt like walking into a place we didn't fully belong in." Gibson sensed it too. He had prepared for logistical difficulties, unexpected delays, or miscommunications, but not this strange compression in the air, this quiet that felt purposeful. It was as though the landscape itself was holding its breath. And then, just moments before the cameras were set to roll, the first unusual incident happened. A sudden gust of wind, cold enough to make people flinch, swept across the set, rattling equipment and scattering dust. It came from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. Meteorologists later confirmed there was no recorded change in the local weather at that time. No storm, no atmospheric anomaly, nothing that could explain the blast of air that felt almost intentional. Still, the crew shook it off and continued, but the strangeness only deepened. When the actors rehearsed lines from the Sermon on the Mount, a hush would fall over the set, not silence, but something deeper, something thick and resonant, as if the surroundings were absorbing every word. Microphone operators said the audio became unnaturally clean during those moments, free of wind interference or background noise, as though nature itself had withdrawn to listen. And when the scenes shifted to moments of judgment or betrayal, the mood changed again. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. The sky dimmed without clouds. A coldness crept into the cracks of the ancient stone. Crew members found themselves glancing over their shoulders, unable to explain why they felt watched. One lighting technician described it best. "It was like the ground remembered what happened 2,000 years ago, and we were trespassing on that memory." It wasn't fear exactly. It was reverence, mixed with an unsettling awareness that they were stepping into spiritual territory, not cinematic ground. But the most disturbing moment came during an early test take. As Caviezel rehearsed a short segment, simple blocking, no dialogue, the camera operator signaled for a pause. He leaned forward, squinting. On the monitor, a faint distortion flickered behind Caviezel's shoulder, something like a shimmer, a ripple in the air. It lasted less than a second, so brief that most would overlook it. But the operator had been behind a camera for decades. His instinct told him this wasn't a technical glitch. They replayed the clip. The distortion appeared again. Not a shape, not a figure, not anything identifiable. Just movement. Movement where nothing had moved. The crew exchanged uneasy glances but avoided discussing it openly. No one wanted to be the first to say aloud what they all privately wondered. Were these coincidences or signs? Gibson didn't comment, but his expression darkened with recognition. He felt it deeply, like a quiet acknowledgement that the boundary between reenactment and spiritual reality was thinning. The strangeness intensified as the days went on. Equipment would fail inexplicably only during scenes of suffering, then operate flawlessly during moments of forgiveness. Extras reported sudden chills that ran down their backs mid-scene. Some swore they saw flickers of light dance across the set when no reflective surfaces were present. One crew member quit after 3 days. His only explanation, "I can't work on a set where I feel like we're not alone." Lake stalled, yet despite the unease, or perhaps because of it, the performances grew richer, more raw. Caviezel carried himself with a weight that seemed beyond acting. Gibson directed with a fervor that bordered on spiritual urgency. The film was beginning to take on a life of its own, and the cast had no idea that the most shocking events were still ahead, events that would leave them questioning not only their craft, but the very nature of the unseen world around them. The day scheduled for the scourging scene arrived with an uneasiness the crew could feel long before dawn. It was the most physically demanding sequence in the entire film. A moment meant to convey the brutality that preceded the crucifixion, yet no one imagined how far reality would blur into the reenactment. Gibson had insisted from the beginning, this scene had to confront audiences with the cost of redemption, not stylized, not symbolic, not softened for comfort. He wanted the viewer to feel the weight of every strike, every groan, every breath ripped from Christ's body. And Jim Caviezel understood that better than anyone. Hours before cameras rolled, Caviezel stood in silence, eyes closed, his bare back exposed to the bitter morning air. The makeup team worked meticulously, layering prosthetics and artificial wounds, but even they sensed a tension in the atmosphere, an anticipation that felt heavier than the scene itself. Around them, the courtyard, built to resemble ancient Jerusalem, seemed unusually still. Not silent, but waiting. When filming began, the two actors portraying Roman soldiers took their positions, experienced performers, disciplined, precise. They had trained for weeks to execute the strikes without injury. Every movement had been calculated, every trajectory practiced. This was choreography, not chaos. And yet the moment Gibson called action, something shifted. The first blows cracked through the air with terrifying force. The whip struck the wooden barrier strapped to Caviezel's back, producing a sound so visceral that several extras flinched, despite knowing it was staged. Caviezel's body reacted with a realism that startled even the crew. But then something went wrong. One of the soldiers swung with slightly more momentum than intended, just a margin of error, the kind that shouldn't have mattered. But it mattered. The metal tip of the flagrum struck not the wooden board, but Caviezel's skin. A gasp tore from his throat, raw, involuntary. People froze. The scream captured by the microphones wasn't performance. It was pain, sharp and immediate. Caviezel staggered forward, breath ripped from his lungs. The soldier's face turned white. He stepped back in horror, whispering apologies, shaking. Gibson rushed forward, but Caviezel lifted his hand. "No," he said through clenched teeth. "Keep going." The crew hesitated. It was clear the blow had opened the skin, a thin gash appearing across his back, red already seeping through the makeup. A medic approached, but Caviezel refused again. His voice trembled, but his resolve did not. "We finish this scene," he insisted. "For him, too, that..." The second take began, though no one felt ready. The extras no longer acted their grief, they lived it. Some turned their faces away, others whispered prayers under their breath. Then the second accident happened. Another strike, another miscalculation. This time, the metal barb caught Caviezel across the lower back. ripping a wound more severe than the first, nearly a foot long. He collapsed against the post, biting down to keep from screaming, his entire body shuddering. A sound technician would later say, "For a moment it felt like the air itself recoiled." People rushed toward him, but Caviezel shook his head, tears in his eyes, not from fear, but from something deeper, something almost reverent. "Let the cameras keep rolling," he whispered. The next few minutes unfolded with a gravity no one could describe. Caviezel stood trembling, wounds stinging under the cold air. The soldiers swung with absolute precision now, careful to avoid further harm, but the psychological toll had already taken hold. Crew members wiped their eyes discreetly. One extra collapsed sobbing. A cameraman admitted he could barely see the monitor through the tears. It didn't feel like acting. It felt like witnessing. When Gibson finally called "cut," the silence that followed was unlike anything the set had yet experienced. No one moved at first. No one spoke. Even those who did not consider themselves religious felt something ancient pass over them, a weight, a sorrow, a presence. Medics tended to Caviezel, who sat with his head bowed, breathing slowly. Despite the pain, he seemed strangely calm, almost peaceful. Later, he would say that in those moments, he felt closer to Christ than in any church. But the strangest part came afterwards. Several crew members claimed that during the heaviest strikes, the sky dimmed, not clouded, not overcast, but darkened in a way that defied explanation. Others swore they saw a faint shimmer in the corner of the courtyard, like heat rising from pavement. Except the air was cold. One assistant director put it simply, "There was something in that space with us. You could feel it." The scourging scene was completed that day, but it left an imprint on everyone present, an imprint of suffering that felt too real, too raw, too unfiltered. And none of them knew that an even more dangerous moment was waiting just ahead, because the cross was next. The day they filmed The Way of the Cross was the day the boundary between reenactment and reality all but dissolved. The entire cast knew the scene would be exhausting. They knew Caviezel would have to endure the weight of a massive wooden beam, falls onto stone, and hours of physical strain. But no one, not even Gibson, understood how far the suffering would go. The cross they built was not a hollow prop. Gibson refused anything that felt theatrical. He insisted on real wood, real density, something that could convey the burden Christ carried. When the final piece was weighed, it came in at over 150 pounds. Caviezel didn't flinch. He lowered his shoulder beneath the beam, inhaled deeply, and nodded. "Let's do it." The first takes moved smoothly. The actors playing Roman soldiers barked commands. The crowd pressed in around him, and Caviezel dragged the cross across the uneven stones of the recreated streets of Jerusalem. Dust clung to his sweat. His breathing grew heavier. Makeup streaked. The physicality was brutal, but controlled. Until the fall. It was scripted. Caviezel was meant to collapse forward. The soldiers would catch the beam before it crushed him, and the scene would continue. It should have been simple, practiced, safe. But in one split second, everything went wrong. The soldier assigned to brace the cross misjudged the angle just inches, nothing more, but enough. The beam slipped past his grip. Gravity seized it, and before anyone could react, the full weight of the cross crashed down onto Caviezel's head and shoulder. A sickening thud echoed through the set. The extras gasped. One actress screamed. Dust exploded upward as Caviezel hit the ground with the force of a man struck by a falling tree. He didn't move. For one frozen heartbeat, the entire crew feared the worst. Then a groan, low, strangled, escaped Caviezel's throat. The director of photography dropped his camera. Medics rushed forward. Gibson pushed through the crowd, shouting Caviezel's name. When they lifted the beam, Caviezel's face twisted in agony. His eyes squeezed shut. His shoulder hung at an unnatural angle, a dislocation. Later, he would describe the sensation as a bolt of fire cracking through my arm. But in that moment, he said nothing. He simply fought to stay conscious. A medic insisted the scene had to stop. Caviezel needed immediate treatment, but Caviezel shook his head weakly, breath trembling. "No, leave it." Gibson stared at him, stunned. "Jim, you can't continue with your shoulder out." Caviezel gritted his teeth. This is what he carried. The statement hit everyone present with a weight heavier than the cross itself. Against every protest, Caviezel insisted they finish the take. He staggered to his feet, the beam once again lowered onto his battered shoulder. His arm hung limp, nerves burning, but he pressed forward. Every step became a prayer of pain. Every fall, a surrender. Some extras were openly crying now, not acting, but overcome by the rawness they were witnessing. As the cameras rolled, something eerie happened. The sky, clear moments before, dimmed into a dull grey. A cold wind swept through the street, sharp enough to cut through costumes and raise goosebumps on exposed skin. One boom operator said the microphone trembled in his hands, though no one touched him. Another technician whispered, "This feels wrong, like something is passing through here." Immense, yet Caviezel continued, his face contorted, eyes glistening, breaths ragged. There was no acting in his screams, there was no performance in his collapse. Every movement came from a place so real that even the hardened crew struggled to watch. When Gibson finally called cut, the set fell into a harrowed silence. Caviezel slumped against the stones, panting, his shoulder visibly displaced, his body shaking uncontrollably. A medic knelt beside him and whispered, "You should have passed out." "Way the same," but Caviezel only whispered, barely audible, "I wasn't alone." Later, cast members would recall that moment with trembling voices. Some described a pressure in the air, others a sense of eyes watching them. One actor swore he felt a hand on his back during the scene steadying him, though no one was there. Whatever presence lingered around them, it left only after Caviezel was carried away for treatment. The physical wounds healed slowly, but the memory of that day, the cross, the fall, the unnatural silence, became one of the most terrifying confirmations that this film was no ordinary production. Long before the lightning strikes, the injuries and the strange presences whispered across the set, the crew had already been facing another mystery, one hidden not on location, but in the quiet shadows of the editing room. It began on the afternoon they filmed one of the most emotionally grueling sequences. Jesus carrying the cross through the narrow streets, surrounded by chaos, sorrow, and the distant drum of Roman authority. To capture every nuance of the moment, Gibson insisted on using three 35mm cameras simultaneously, a standard practice for a scene so physically demanding. Camera A and Camera B covered the primary angles. Caviezel's strained face, the trembling weight of the cross, the dust rising around his feet. Camera C, the backup, was placed at a poor vantage point, partially obstructed by a column, off-center, and never intended to be used. It was insurance, nothing more, or so they thought. When the reels were transported to the development lab that evening, the technicians followed routine procedure. They handled the canisters carefully, logged each reel, immersed them in processing chemicals, and waited for the first images to appear. But the moment the reels from camera A and B surfaced, the room fell silent. Something was wrong. The footage was warped, not scratched, not torn, warped. Entire stretches appeared burned with an overexposed white glow, the kind caused by light leaks. Except there had been no light leaks. The sound strip was degraded, motion blurred in unnatural patterns, as if the camera had shaken violently, yet the rigging setup made shaking impossible. More than 80% of both primary reels had melted into useless ribbons of distorted images. One technician tried to explain it rationally. Chemical imbalance, temperature anomaly, faulty canisters. But none of those theories held. The equipment had been tested repeatedly. The development room was climate controlled. No error codes, no warnings, nothing that could account for the destruction. Then someone inspected the backup reel. At first, they expected the same corruption. After all, the cameras shared the same environment, the same workflow, the same fate. But when the film from camera C emerged, the technicians froze. It was perfect. Every frame, every second, crystal clarity, no blur, no flicker, no exposure damage, not even the faintest scratch along the edges. It was impossible. The backup camera had the worst lighting, the poorest angle, the least stable footing. It should have produced muddy footage, barely usable at best. Instead, it recorded the entire sequence with a sharpness the team couldn't replicate, even with their best equipment. The technicians stared at the reel in disbelief. One of them whispered, "Who set the exposure?" Another shook his head. No one touched it. The footage looked as though it had been protected, shielded from whatever destroyed the other two reels. When the team compared timestamps, it became even stranger. The moment camera A and B suffered their mysterious exposure burn was the exact moment Caviezel fell to his knees beneath the cross. A moment of overwhelming agony, a moment the backup camera captured flawlessly. The lead archivist reviewed the results repeatedly, trying to find any hint of a mechanical explanation. There was none. Finally, after hours of staring at the impossible, he muttered, "It's as if someone, or something, wanted this reel to survive." Well, when Gibson was informed, he listened without speaking. The room felt cold, the lights suddenly too bright. He asked for the reel to be shown. As the projector hummed to life, the footage illuminated the wall with an almost ethereal glow. Caviezel stumbled, dust rising around him like incense. The cross towered above him, heavy as judgment. The extras cried out, the soldiers barked. But behind it all, there was a strange harmony to the moment, an unplanned cohesion, like the take had been guided rather than performed. When the reel ended, no one moved. Finally, Gibson spoke softly, almost to himself. "This is the take we were meant to have." He ordered the reel to be stored separately, locked away from the others until it could be duplicated. Some on the team joked about it nervously, calling it the reel that refused to die. But the humor never lasted. The more they examined it, the more unsettled they became. Why had two cameras failed at the exact same moment? Why had the backup, poorly placed, poorly lit, captured the scene flawlessly? Why did the footage feel intentional? Rumors spread quietly through the crew. Some believed it was divine intervention. Others whispered it was a warning. A few refused to discuss it at all. But one thing was certain. The inexplicable had not only touched the set, it had imprinted itself directly onto the film. And after the unearthed reel, the mysteries on set began to intensify, in ways that no one was prepared to face. As filming continued, the production moved into scenes heavy with symbolism, moments of betrayal, judgment, sorrow, and unspoken spiritual weight. That was when the air on set began to change again. Not through storms or technical failures this time, but through something more subtle and far more unsettling. It began with whispers, quiet stories traded between crew members who didn't want to be seen as superstitious. A grip mentioned seeing a figure standing between two lighting towers, a tall silhouette dressed in pale robes. He assumed it was an extra who had wandered off, but when he walked over, the space was empty. Another technician claimed he saw someone step into frame during a rehearsal, only to discover later that the camera had recorded no one. At first, people brushed it off. Stress, long hours, shadows thrown by ancient stone walls. Simple explanations, but the incidents multiplied. During a crucifixion rehearsal, a makeup artist noticed a man standing behind Gibson, watching the scene with intense focus. She assumed he was part of the production staff until she realized he wore garments that didn't belong to any department on set. When she turned to speak to him, he was gone. Gibson later said he felt someone behind him that day, as if someone was leaning in to see the monitors, though no one was there. Other sightings followed, each stranger than the last. Actors reported figures drifting through the crowd, scenes, faces they didn't recognize, backgrounds that didn't match any of the extras, people who appeared deeply emotional yet never appeared on call sheets or dailies. Some of these wandering figures were described as peaceful, others as solemn, but all had one thing in common. They disappeared before anyone could approach them. One assistant director insisted he saw a man dressed entirely in white, standing on a hill overlooking the set. His posture was still, almost statuesque. But when the AD looked away for a brief moment, the man was gone, vanished in broad daylight. Then there was the sound. Boom operators began picking up faint murmurs during takes, soft, indistinguishable, almost like whispered prayers. They assumed it came from extras, but when they isolated the audio, the whispers had no spatial origin. They were everywhere and nowhere at once. Sound editors later confirmed that the frequencies didn't match human speech patterns on set. But the most chilling moment occurred during a sunrise shoot. As Caviezel prepared for one of the quieter scenes, a sudden warmth filled the air around him, subtle yet undeniably real. He paused, lowering his gaze. Crew members nearby said the temperature rose noticeably, like stepping into a beam of sunlight, yet the sky remained clouded and cold. One member of the team asked, "Did someone turn on a heater?" No. There were no heaters on that side of the set. Caviezel didn't speak about it until much later, but when he did, he described it simply. "I felt accompanied, not protected, not watched. Accompanied. Not every presence felt peaceful, however. In scenes portraying betrayal, condemnation, or spiritual darkness, a different atmosphere settled in. Extras shivered involuntarily, torches flickered violently despite calm winds. Several actors said they felt a sudden weight on their chests, as if the emotions of the moment weren't merely acted but imposed on them. One Roman soldier, extra, left the set in tears after a take, saying he felt something grieving beside him, though no one was near. Another actor fainted without any medical explanation, regaining consciousness only to whisper, "I saw faces in the shadows." More than once, Gibson halted production, not because of technical issues, but because the intensity in the air became overwhelming. He later admitted that during the heaviest scenes, he felt as though the unseen world had stepped forward, just a little too close. And then, photographs complicated things further. A still photographer captured behind-the-scenes images daily. But when reviewing them each night, certain photos showed faint outlines, blurs shaped almost like people, though no one had been standing in those positions. Not reflections, not lens flares, shapes, figures, some appearing to walk, others standing still, observing. Yet when the negatives were examined, there were no defects, no errors, nothing to explain the shapes. Every expert consulted shrugged, every technician avoided giving an answer. It was around this time that something extraordinary began unfolding among the crew. Conversions, confessions, unexpected spiritual awakenings. People asked for rosaries, extras asked to meet with priests. Several crew members requested baptism before filming ended. The strange presences didn't frighten them, they humbled them. Something was moving through the production, not hostile, not theatrical, but undeniably other. And as the film pushed deeper into the final, most devastating scenes, those unseen presences seemed to draw nearer still, as though the veil between two worlds had become thin enough to touch. When The Passion of the Christ finally neared completion, the cast and crew felt an overwhelming mixture of exhaustion and awe. They had endured physical danger, spiritual weight, and a series of unexplainable events that still haunted their dreams. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared them for what awaited once the film left the sanctuary of the set and entered the world. The storm began quietly. Before a single frame reached theaters, whispers started circulating through the industry. Executives who had once politely dismissed the project now spoke of it with a tone that hovered between alarm and disdain. Private screenings for select insiders elicited reactions unlike anything Gibson had ever encountered. Some viewers left the room pale, shaken, unable to speak. Others reacted with anger, raw, visceral, almost defensive. A few accused the film of being too real, too direct, too disturbing. Gibson knew the film was intense. He expected discomfort, but what followed was not discomfort, it was war. The press launched the first strike. Articles filled with accusations began appearing in major publications. Some described the film as dangerously violent, others claimed it glorified suffering. Certain critics went further, leveling accusations of anti-Semitism, fanaticism, and manipulation. The narrative escalated rapidly, fueled by commentators who hadn't seen the film at all but spoke with the certainty of experts. Gibson watched as headlines twisted his intentions into something sinister. The backlash was not merely cultural, it was ideological. Hollywood studios, the same ones that had rejected the film early on, now distanced themselves publicly, as if exposure to Gibson's vision threatened their reputations. Invitations vanished. Meetings evaporated. Colleagues who once praised him now refused to return phone calls. Behind closed doors, studio executives issued quiet warnings. Do not associate with the film. Do not promote it. Do not support Gibson. Jim Caviezel experienced the shockwave as well. Before the film, he had been considered one of the most promising actors of his generation. After private screenings, the tone shifted. He was told he had become too recognizable, too divisive, too religious for mainstream audiences. One executive delivered the message plainly: "You shouldn't have played him. Hollywood won't forget this." Yet while the industry recoiled, audiences responded with a force no critic could suppress. When the film premiered, lines wrapped around entire city blocks. Theaters filled with people who came silently, reverently, some carrying rosaries, others holding prayer cards. Viewers stayed in their seats long after the credits ended, unable to move. In some cities, priests and pastors entered theaters to offer comfort. In others, entire congregations shut down Sunday services to attend screenings together. Within days, the film became a phenomenon. It broke records for a non-English language film. It defied predictions, outperforming blockbusters with massive marketing budgets despite having none. Word of mouth spread like wildfire from churches, from families, from communities moved in ways they couldn't comprehend. And that only intensified the backlash. Commentators doubled down, publishing editorials attacking both Gibson and anyone who supported the project. The media accused the film of emotional manipulation, theological extremism, and cultural danger. Some universities refused to allow public screenings. A few governments banned the film entirely. Gibson bore the brunt of the hatred. Talk shows mocked him. Editorials vilified him. Activists demanded boycotts. Each week, the criticism grew sharper, more personal, more vicious, and beneath the public outrage was something colder, more coordinated, a quiet but unmistakable effort to push Gibson out of the industry he once dominated. He later described those months as a weight pressing down from all sides. Meanwhile, Caviezel felt the consequences in a different way. Auditions dried up, offers vanished, agents pulled back. He once said, "I went from being sought after to being avoided." Yet he carried it with the dignity of someone who understood the price of stepping into sacred territory. What neither man realized was that the worst of the storm had not yet arrived. Because as the world reacted, some in awe, others in anger, forces far beyond Hollywood were beginning to close in on Gibson personally. Pressures he could not escape, scrutiny he could not withstand. A collapse that would push him down a path darker than anything he faced before filming began. The spiritual battles on set were only the beginning. The real crucible was still ahead. The months following the film's release should have been triumphant. To the outside world, The Passion of the Christ was a miracle of cinema, a work that defied language barriers, financial predictions, and cultural expectations. It shattered records, stirred millions, and embedded itself into history. But for Mel Gibson, success did not bring peace. It brought pressure relentless, suffocating, and merciless. As the film dominated headlines, so did the attacks. Every interview became a battlefield. Every public appearance invited a fresh wave of scrutiny. Journalists dissected his words with surgical precision. Critics painted him as an extremist, and media commentators framed him as a dangerous outlier in an industry that preferred comfortable narratives. Gibson felt the shift long before it became public. Friends grew distant. Phone calls went unanswered. People he had worked with for decades suddenly behaved as though his presence carried risk. He later described the feeling. It was like watching doors close one by one until I was standing in a hallway with no exits. And under that pressure, old wounds resurfaced. The isolation gnawed at him. The hostility fed doubts he thought he had buried. The weight of public judgment pressed against his chest like a stone he could not lift. He found himself slipping slowly at first, then in ways he could no longer control. The drinking returned, Alcohol had once been an escape, a temporary refuge from emotional chaos. Now it became a crutch he leaned on with increasing desperation. Nights blurred, days dissolved into fog. The spiritual clarity he had once felt during the creation of the film began to dim beneath layers of exhaustion and despair. Those closest to him saw the change. He was irritable, withdrawn, haunted by a sense of being hunted. He avoided crowds, he avoided cameras, he avoided himself. Then came the night that changed everything. In 2006, Gibson was pulled over on a quiet Malibu road. What should have been a routine stop spiraled instantly into disaster. In a moment of intoxicated rage, raw, unfiltered, fueled by months of internal collapse, he uttered words that would ignite a firestorm across the world. Within hours, the incident spread through every news outlet. His face, once synonymous with admiration, became a symbol of scandal. Headlines sharpened their knives, commentators attacked with unrestrained fury. Hollywood, already uneasy with his film's theological weight, now found the perfect justification to cut him off completely. Gibson would later say, "It wasn't a mistake, it was a public execution." Projects disappeared overnight. Studios severed ties. Longtime collaborators distanced themselves to save their own careers. For the first time in his life, Gibson felt truly alone. He retreated from the world that once celebrated him. He stopped giving interviews. He avoided award shows, gatherings, even casual industry events. Lawsuits mounted. Tabloids tore into his personal life. And the faith that had once carried him through the darkest parts of the film's production now felt distant, a quiet ember beneath the ashes of shame. But beneath the humiliation and collapse, something unexpected was stirring. In the quiet of that exile, Gibson went back to the scriptures, not for research, not for a film, but because he had nowhere else to turn. The same pages that had ignited the passion now confronted him again, not with purpose this time, but with truth. He realized that the spiritual war he felt during the production had not ended. It had simply changed battlegrounds, and in that darkness, a new conviction began to take shape. A project he believed he was meant to create long before he understood it. The Resurrection, a film not about suffering, but victory. Not about the cross, but the realm beyond it. Not about the wounds of God, but his triumph over death itself. Gibson was far from healed. The world still rejected him, but the spark had returned, faint yet resolute. The story that had shattered him was calling him back. While Gibson battled public scrutiny, Jim Caviezel faced a quieter, more invisible form of punishment, one that unfolded slowly, subtly, and without a single official announcement. It didn't arrive as a scandal, nor as a dramatic headline. It arrived as silence. Before the Passion of the Christ, Caviezel was ascending, praised by directors, respected by peers, and considered one of Hollywood's most promising leading men. His performances had depth, restraint, and emotional precision. Casting agents called him the next great dramatic actor. Studios were circling him with major offers. But everything changed the moment the film premiered. At first, Caviezel didn't notice it. He attended press events, answered interviews, and spoke openly about his experience on set. He spoke with humility about prayer, sacrifice, physical suffering, and the spiritual weight of portraying Christ. He didn't promote himself, he promoted the message. That was his first offense. Hollywood had little tolerance for sincerity, especially sincere faith expressed without irony. When Caviezel spoke, he spoke earnestly. And that earnestness unsettled an industry that preferred roles to truth. Then came the second offense. He had played Jesus too well. Producers worried audiences would no longer see Caviezel as a romantic lead, an action star, a flawed hero, or anything else. His face had become inseparable from the image of Christ. To them, that wasn't reverence, it was inconvenience. Auditions began to dry up, first slowly, then abruptly, then completely. Phone calls weren't returned. Scripts stopped arriving. Directors who had once praised him grew distant. When Caviezel finally confronted one executive privately, the man didn't deny it. With a shrug, he said, "You're too recognizable now. people will see him, not you. It makes audiences uncomfortable. Caviezel walked out of the meeting knowing the truth. He had been quietly exiled. There was no public boycott, no formal blacklist, no declared ban. Hollywood didn't need any of that. A closed door makes no noise. And yet Caviezel refused to resent the cost. He had always understood the risk. Gibson had warned him years earlier, "If you do this, you may lose everything." Caviezel had answered, "Then I lose it for the right reason." Weak to the ass. Still, the consequences were brutal. His agents, once enthusiastic, grew hesitant. He went months without meaningful work. A few independent films came and went, but nothing close to the roles he once received. Reporters asked where he had disappeared to. Industry insiders whispered that he was too polarizing. But Caviezel didn't collapse under the silence. He transformed inside it. During his years away from the spotlight, he embraced a quieter calling. He deepened his spiritual life. He traveled, speaking to small communities, churches, youth groups, sharing his experience not as an actor seeking applause, but as a man who had touched something sacred and was forever changed by it. He also devoted himself to his family. He and his wife adopted 3 children with severe medical needs, choices many considered burdens. Caviezel called them "my greatest gifts." Slowly, the world outside Hollywood began to recognize what Hollywood chose to ignore. Caviezel wasn't disappearing, he was being refined. Then, almost without warning, his career flickered back to life. A television series took a chance on him, a role as a stoic guardian haunted by his past. Person of Interest became one of the most acclaimed series of its decade, resurrecting his presence in American households every week. Yet even with success returning, Caviezel never distanced himself from the film that had changed everything. He embraced it, carried it, lived by it. Years later, he said something that silenced every room that heard it. When you play him, something enters you, and something leaves you. You're never the same. Many believed he meant the injuries, the exhaustion, the pain, but those closest to him knew the truth. He wasn't speaking about the body. He was speaking about the soul. And as Gibson prepared to rise from exile with a sequel unlike anything the world had seen, both men, scarred, humbled, transformed, found themselves drawn once more toward the story that had rewritten their lives. As the years passed, something remarkable happened, something neither Gibson nor Caviezel could have anticipated while standing beneath the brutal sun of Matera, bleeding, trembling, and carrying burdens far heavier than props. The film they poured themselves into, physically, emotionally, spiritually, refused to fade. Unlike most cinematic works, which burst brightly and then dissolve into the noise of newer releases, the Passion of the Christ grew louder with time. People around the world continued to speak of it, revisit it, argue about it, wrestle with it. Entire communities organized group viewings every Lent. Some described it as a cinematic masterpiece, others as a spiritual wound that refused to close. But all agreed on one thing. The film did not behave like a film. It behaved like a mirror. There were stories, thousands of them. A man in Brazil who claimed the film saved his marriage. A woman in Poland who said it inspired her to forgive the father she had hated for 20 years. A young man in Mexico who walked out of a theater and went directly to confession for the first time since childhood. Priests, pastors, monks, and missionaries spoke of conversions sparked solely by the experience of watching it. In Italy, an entire village requested baptisms after a collective screening. In Kenya, a missionary reported people falling to their knees in the dirt, weeping openly. And then there were the private stories, the quiet ones. The ones whispered in confessions or written in trembling handwriting. I felt him. I understood for the first time. He was real to me in that moment. The impact startled even Gibson, who often avoided discussing it publicly. When asked about the film's endurance, he would simply shrug, as if acknowledging something he could not claim credit for. People weren't responding to me, he once said. They were responding to him. But the most surprising transformation happened off-screen. In Gibson himself, After the firestorm of controversy, the years of isolation, the scandal that nearly destroyed him, something began to rebuild in him, not overnight, not dramatically, but in quiet increments. A stirring, a whisper, a familiar calling. The Passion had shown Christ's suffering, but the story was not finished. Gibson found himself returning again and again to Scripture, revisiting ancient writings, meditating on what happened in the 3 days the world calls holy, the descent into the realm of the dead, the confrontation with darkness, the triumphant rising that shook the foundations of history, the moments no film had ever attempted to depict with seriousness. And from those meditations, a new vision began to take form, larger, stranger, more daring than the first. A film not about death, but the breaking of death. Not about pain, but power. Not about sacrifice alone, but triumph over every realm. He called it the resurrection. He described it not as a sequel, but as a companion, a continuation of the cosmic story that revealed what lies beyond the grave. Rumors whispered that the film would explore dimensions unseen by human eyes, realms hinted at in Scripture, but never fully visualized. Angels, principalities, the harrowing of hell, the silence of the tomb, the explosion of light that shattered the boundary between mortality and eternity. Caviezel agreed to return, carrying the scars of the first film, aware that the second would demand just as much, perhaps more. If the first film showed his suffering, he told Gibson, the second must show his kingdom. Bean will. But amidst the anticipation, Gibson did something few expected. He spoke finally about the mysteries that surrounded the original production. In an interview, when asked about the strange events on set, he paused for a long moment. His face softened. His voice grew quiet. There were things, he said, that none of us could explain. Things we didn't talk about because, how could we? How do you describe what doesn't fit in this world? He didn't give details, not directly. He didn't mention the lightning, or the whispers, or the figures in white, or the supernatural stillness that swept through the set like a breath. And he didn't mention the film reel, the one they found intact when the others burned. But he did say this: to this day, when I think about what happened, I don't try to understand it anymore. Some things aren't meant to be understood, only witnessed. Thanks for watching. Those words echoed deeply, especially among those who had been there, those who carried their own stories, their own unanswered questions, their own memories of something that moved between them during those months of filming. A sound technician once said he still kept several of the original recordings locked away, not for nostalgia, but because when he listened to them late at night, he could swear he heard faint voices, prayers woven into the static. He refused to play them for anyone else. An extra who had appeared briefly in the Jerusalem marketplace wrote years later that she had left the film set as a different person, though she couldn't articulate why. Something looked at me, she wrote. Not with eyes, something else. And I've never forgotten it. Two's end. Even Caviezel, who rarely spoke about the strangest moments, finally admitted, there were days when I felt him. Not the idea of him, not the memory. Him. Such testimonies remained scattered, unorganized, unclaimed, yet undeniably real to the people who carried them. The legacy of the Passion of the Christ is not a box office record. It is not controversy. It is not cinematic technique. Its legacy is the question it leaves behind. A question it quietly places in the heart of every person who sees it. Now that you have witnessed this, what will you do with it? Gibson once said he didn't make the film to provide answers. He made it to stir something holy, to awaken something forgotten, to confront, to pierce, to remind. And as he prepares to unveil the resurrection, one truth remains unchanged. The mystery that moved across the set in Matera never left. It waits, it watches, it whispers still, inviting every soul who sees the story to face a choice as old as faith itself. Because now that the veil has been lifted, it cannot be lowered again.